I would like to think that I'm mature enough and old enough and confident enough to not have to rely on my peers to build me up or give me validation in what I'm doing. But if I'm only doing things to see if I can do them, to see if it breaks me, then I think there is a certain sense of that to where, yeah, I don't think I need that anymore.
Welcome to the Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. In adventure racing lingo, a dark zone is a time when, due to darkness or safety, teams are paused on the course before continuing with the race. During that time, stories are exchanged, friendships are kindled, spirits are restored, and teams have a chance to prepare for the next challenge. We hope that you make good use of this dark zone. We're glad that you're here. Today's guest is Shawn Lemaster of 361 Adventures. Shawn is an avid adventure racer, race director, and long-distance bikepacker. He brings the perspective of his years in the sport to today's episode, as well as his enjoyment of long-distance pursuits outside of adventure racing. Thank you to Shawn for joining us for this episode. We're also happy to announce that TANZ Navigation has come on as a sponsor of the Dark Zone. You can learn all about them at www.tanznavigation.org. That's TANZ navigation.org, all one word. Listeners of the Dark Zone can enter to win a free copy of Mark Latanzi's book, Squiggly Lines, by emailing me at brian@ardarkzone.com. Squiggly Lines is the preeminent guidebook for navigation using a map and a compass. Thank you to Mark, Laura, and to everybody at TANZ for coming on board. Again, thank you for joining the Dark Zone. Today's world doesn't lack for ways to grab your time and attention. We're grateful to have you as a listener. Thank you again to Shawn for joining us. Enjoy. So welcome to the Dark Zone Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens, joined by Shawn Lemaster of 361 Adventures. 361 Adventures, it comes out of the northern Kentucky, southern Ohio, West Virginia, southeast, beautiful part of the country. Shawn, where are you guys located? Tell me where I'm wrong.
No, you are correct. We're out of Kentucky. Actually grew up in Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, and now our business, just my brother and I, we're out of kind of northern Kentucky, more so than anything.
And 361 Adventures, I believe, has had a long tradition of putting on one great race a year or several races a year. This year you focused on the FIG, am I correct?
That is correct, yeah. We dialed it back. We used to put on 6 to 7 races a year back in the prime. But then, time constraints. I think you probably heard this from race directors before, a lot of race direction, more so a passion project. We focus on the FIG now, and we just held that last weekend, actually.
And how'd the race go?
Exceptional. We actually had a record turnout for us, around 150 racers. A new location for the FIG. Usually it's in Natural Bridge, Red River Gorge area. We wanted to kind of move racers away from the kind of busy weekend roads and just give them more off-road options to explore. So we had it at Caburn Lake. Exceptional turnout. Weather was phenomenal. And I would say by and large, it's the most compliments that we've ever gotten post-race. So super pleased with how it went.
And the FIG is the longest running race in Kentucky?
It is. We did not start the FIG. It was handed down from us from Stephanie Ross. This was the 19th year that it was hosted, and then next year will be the 20th anniversary. So we'll have to do something extra spectacular for the 20th.
Yeah, we had Steph on as an earlier guest on the Dark Zone, and she talked a lot about the race, and it was held in a different part of the state, but then it was time to bring to a different location. So a large part of our audience are obviously adventure racers, people who enjoy hearing about races, hearing about the type of terrain, the challenges, topography. When someone came to the FIG this year, it was a 12-hour race. Am I correct?
Yep.
And what did they experience over those 12 hours? Was it a linear course? Did they have choice? Was it paddling? Things like that?
Yeah. So if at all possible, us as like course designer, race directors, we love setting up a course where there are where we force as many decisions as possible. So we were able to do it with this course, mainly because of the terrain and location. So it's a departure from previous FIGs and even a lot of other races where we did not present them the maps until the prologue. So they really had very little information by design. They showed up for the prologue, got their maps, and then it was pretty much an open course, Brian. So any points, any order, no specified mode of travel. So it was really a free for all race, which is what we kind of love doing. It was a big course. Only 5 teams, I think, cleared it. And yeah, lots and lots of options. I'm fairly confident not 2 teams attacked the course in the same way. So also departure from the FIG. Usually it's a short paddle, either dragging your boat down the Red River, or there's a few small lakes in the area. We had all of Cave Run Lake to recreate on. So some racers paddle more than others. We had the whole lake. We had like legit single track for the bike points if you wanted to get them by bike. And then, yeah, we had a huge trek course as well if you wanted to get those on foot. I know a lot of racers kind of plucked off the edge points along the shore by boat. So that's kind of how the race went. Big course, lots and lots of options.
What was the split among racers in terms of experience versus beginner versus mid-packs?
Yeah. So we had, like I said, around 150 racers. I want to say maybe 30-ish were completely new racers. And we know that. We just ask them during registration, are you a new racer? So at least, probably around 30 admitted they were completely new to the sport. Had several successes with new racers as well. We had one team, 4 racers completely new and never raced before. And even though, they came in and they were like, here, you can reuse your passport because it has so few punches in it, smiles, like absolutely had a blast out there. And it's rewarding for us when, we hear the affirmative that it's not even going to take them 2 or 3 days. They're like, yeah, I'm going to do this again, which is awesome for us because usually you have to let it sink in and let the bruises and bumps and exhaustion wear off at least a couple days before you commit to another go at it.
Yeah, we tend to find that the people who are enamored with the sport are usually on the way home in the car. If they're the passenger, they're chatting with the driver while they're looking at their phone and they're looking for the next race someplace else. Many a guest on the Dark Zone has talked about how they went out there inexperienced, under-trained, under-equipped, got absolutely clobbered and loved it and couldn't get back out to race there soon enough. So good on you for having 20% of your race be brand new racers.
Yeah, we're stoked about it. And like same thing, like that's how my brother and I got into it as well. We showed up to our first adventure race, got absolutely walloped. Like we did not understand the physicality and just what it took to be, not even good at the sport, just mid-pack at the sport. So it beat us down. But yeah, next week we're looking for the next race. So.
And so with 20% of the racers being brand new, 80% were mid-pack, were experienced. What was the feedback on the course from those who've seen races before? Did they like the placement of the checkpoints? Did they find them relatively far apart? Was there any challenging navigation or terrain? What was the real challenge that the experienced racers came across?
Yeah, definitely the real challenge for this one was the route decisions. How to, especially given the format to where they did not receive their maps. It was on the clock. So, there's a take and give there as to whether you want to spend the time planning your route or just, run and gun. So I think by and large, it was definitely how do we go about this in the most efficient manner? Navigation wasn't particularly challenging just because the terrain in that area is so prominent. There's nothing too sneaky. We would try to find a few parallel features to tuck a checkpoint in here and there, but by and large, you're looking at really steep re-entrant size and hilltops. So navigation wasn't that big of an issue. I would say for the mid-packers, definitely playing the time game came as a factor, just because it's hard to get your map on the clock and then also do all the route math and what should I actually go for, what do I have time to go for, and when should I pull the plug and head back to the finish.
That's a brand new dynamic. We saw the same dynamic this year in the Adventure Racing National Championships, where teams got the maps with very little time to plan before the race. When the race started, a common feedback point: some people wish they'd spent more time with the maps. People wish they spent another 15 minutes looking at the maps before running out of the race start, and all of a sudden being full of adrenaline. And we all know that when the heart rate goes up, the brain power goes down, right? And we've seen that time and time again. And you make a good point about the terrain and the navigation. One thing I hear repeatedly is that when you race in certain parts of the country, because the terrain is so big, big mountains, big re-entrance, big water, the navigation is easier, but the land is a lot harder to travel across. And then in other parts of the country, the land is not as steep, not as hard, but the navigation is a lot harder because it's less prominent. So it's interesting how that works for various races, various times, and the physicality. And I did a breakdown race that you had back in 2015, and this was in West Virginia, West Virginia border. And I remember it just being a brutal piece of land in terms of the elevation gain and the ups and the downs. The steepest road that I ever rode down was during that race in 2015, coming off the start. I couldn't believe how we were flying straight downhill.
Yeah, that's a particularly crazy part of the world, Breaks Interstate Park. Yeah, and I agree. I'm surprised they get by with making roads that steep. Seems like it would be a, crime against the DOT or something. But yeah, pretty impressive. The FIG wasn't nearly that steep, but again, just so prominent that, yeah, navigation not super challenging, I would say, unless you're, new to the sport or, just kind of figuring out orienteering. Not that challenging, but again, it comes back down to the route decisions. Do you go up and over? Do you go around? What's the balance there? So we saw our more experienced racers really excel more so than other years. Not that they don't usually win, but you can tell the guys that are quick with the maps, quick with just visualizing all the ups and downs, and do I run the ridge? I think they really shined in this race.
Well, clearly you did something right because you had 5 teams cleared the course overall. So it was a challenging course. 20% were newcomers. They really enjoyed the race itself. So you laid out a buffet, if you will, of choices, right? Route choices, checkpoint choices, and people had a great time. And I think that your decision to make it a smorgasbord, right? Pick where you want to go, put the pressure a lot easier on the newer racers because they felt the course was there to be sampled, as opposed to I have to be here by a certain time or I'm going to miss a cutoff or I have to take a different route back to the finish. Were there any teams that needed additional assistance, any teams that really struggled out there mightily, or did everybody just sort of make their way through?
No, they did really well. So we only had one mandatory point to kind of force a paddle, but I mean, it was very, it was very reasonable. I think it was maybe 5K total to get that point. And they, it was set up to where right off the bat, they could go out there and paddle and get it, or they could, bike or whatever. We only had one solo racer come in late, but to his credit, he had completely broken his derailleur off the bike, and he had to give us a call at like 7:10, and he was fairly lost. So we worked him through that situation, and he got in at like 10:30. So he was the only one that was kind of lost, broken late. We had a couple, minorish injuries, but no team calling us saying like, this is stupid, we're done, come and pick us up, which is we're going to call it a success, Brian. Yeah,
that's always a victory, right? When the racers don't insist that you come and find them on the course and transport them back to the start finish, that's a victory. So declare victory and go home. So congratulations on having the FIG be so successful, because it really is it's a race royalty, if you will, right? It's a long race. It's been held for a lot of years. It has a warm place in a lot of people's hearts. For the 20th edition, have you even begun to talk about what that's going to look like, or are you going to sit back a little bit and evaluate the race and make a decision then?
Yeah, we'll have to chew on it a bit. I was talking with my guys and even some other racers. They were like, we love it here, referring to Cave Run. Are you going to hold it here next year? Which was interesting. Like when we put it out there, I thought for sure we would get pushback. Like, what are you doing? Like, you can't move the FIG. The FIG is Red River Gorge. Like, what are you doing? But not a single person, not a single comment about, well, this isn't right. And then similarly after the race, people wanted to come back to Cave Run. And I think it's not because they're tired of Red River Gorge. It's just that Cave Run is such a great place to hold an adventure race. You have all the paddling you want. You have some actual single track to play on, more, foot sections than anyone would ever want to include in a 12-hour race. So it's a really great venue. So we'll have to think about it. It seems like for the 20th anniversary, the FIG is quintessentially Red River Gorge, so maybe we should have it at its home location. But we'll have to see. We'll think on that one.
Well, it's always one race at a time, right? And that's one thing we learned in adventure racing. It's one checkpoint at a time, one race at a time, one tee at a time, and go in that direction. So not only has 361 Adventures successfully hosted the FIG this year, for years you did the race called the Breakdown. Talk a bit about those races.
Yeah, so back in what I will call our prime, this is when, not that we were more passionate about it, just had a little more bandwidth to, put on. We had a series called the Unbridled Race Series, which we put on in Kentucky State Parks for years. But then, other than the FIG, one of our kind of flagship headliner races that we're really proud of was the Breakdown Adventure Race. So that started out as a 12-hour race, and then we had several iterations of it from 12 hours to 24 hours to even a 4-day expedition race down there. So yeah, that's definitely one of the races that we're really proud of. Even personally, I would say more so than the FIG, because while we love the FIG, we didn't create the FIG. Stephanie passed it on to us, and we would like to think that we do it right and we do a good job with it, but it's not. It was never our baby. Whereas the Breakdown, that was original. No one had ever raced there before, so that one holds a special place in our AR hearts.
Talk a bit about the Breakdown bikepacking route.
Yeah, so we love the breaks, and then we skipped a year putting on the Breakdown Adventure Race, and that kind of killed the forward momentum as far as hosting an adventure race there. And more so than anything, there's only so many options that a race director can host a race there on. It's, they call it the Grand Canyon of the South. Everything's kind of hemmed in, and there's only, 2 or 3 corridors that we can play on there that, are feasible. So we had explored, I think, about every option that we could in every direction. So it was like, well, I'm not sure what else new to do here. So we skipped a year, and then we still love the area. So we thought, well, we know it really well. There was another race kind of west of the Breakdown called the War Daddy, and it's billed as like the hardest mountain bike race in Kentucky. And it's put on by Trail Sick. John Maggard is the actual dude. And, I'd seen it kind of pop up a few times. I never actually got to race it. But it was like 65, 70 miles kind of on the west side of Break. So I ended up connecting with him. I was like, here's what we're going for. I want to create this bikepacking route that goes from Breaks Interstate Park, goes over in your neck of the woods, and kind of loops back to Breaks Interstate Park. And he was all about it. He's a great guy from the area. So between he and I and input from others, we designed a 300 plus mile bikepacking route that takes off from Breaks Interstate Park there and does a pretty full-on loop all the way back. Lots of good climbing, gravel, asphalt, Pine Mountain Trail. So yeah, any bikepackers out there, if you are a bikepacker, check it out. And if you're not a bikepacker, I'd love to steer you toward that direction, because other than adventure racing, it is by and large the greatest thing I've found as a adventure guy.
The bikepacking crowd is a lot of connection to adventure racing along the way. If I remember correctly, when I read through the notes on the bikepacking route, which I remember being excited for in March of 2020, and I planned on coming down in April of 2020 and giving it a shot. By April of 2020, nobody was going anywhere in the world. It's like 43,000 feet of gain.
It's correct. 43, about 330 miles. It's a hard one. Doug Ritzer, another adventure racing staple. He's been adventure racing quite a while, actually pretty good at it. He and I did it to both vet it and just get it on the books. And I think we were right at 3.5 days is what it took us. So yeah, we, other podcasts, other introductions of it, there's still a challenge out there for anyone to throw down a time in under 2 days. It will mail them. Some Oveja Negra, they're a bikepacking company out of Colorado. They hosted, not hosted, kind of sponsored and amped us up this year and last year. So challenge is still out there. If anybody can ride it in under 2 days, then go for it. Good for them.
And I'll make certain I'll put a link in the show notes to your website on the way in. And I do want to give a credit to the fact that you've adopted part of the War Daddy course, which may be the best name for a race ever. War Daddy. What a name for a now, is that a mountain bike race or a bikepacking race?
Yeah, it's mountain bike. Yeah, I think it's 60 miles or so.
And those 60 miles around the breakdown route?
Yeah. I think most of them are actually. It's in like the Redbird Crest area of south southern Kentucky. And he hosts that every year. So we kind of incorporated that into the breakdown route. So if the Ward Eddy is the hardest race in Kentucky, add like whatever 250 miles, and then you have the breakdown. So
a true someone's ears just perked up, by the way, in podcast land, that they heard the hardest race in Kentucky and they heard an additional 200 plus miles, and they've turned to their calendar and they've begun to flip through their calendar and say, when can I come down and give this a shot? And I think that my experience with Breaks Interstate Park is Breaks is a beautiful, not only is it a great location to ride and race from, very hospitable, cabins on site, a lot of there's some civilization nearby. Will Breaks continue to be the host site for the beginning of the breakdown?
It will be, yeah. And that's, I always like to give a shout out to Austin Bradley. He was is the superintendent there. And when my wife and I first showed up to scout the location, like you said, like full on hospitality, like, yes, whatever you need, however we can help you, we're here for you. And that has continued, since that first, evening we showed up there to talk to Austin. So, yeah. And it's easy. Like it's easy it's easy because it's a loop. Two, it's easy because, like you said, they have the lodge there, restaurant. If you're not into that, campsites. If you're on the other side, high end side of it, they have some really nice cabins. So it's just super easy.
And how nice it is for you to come on the podcast and talk about working with a land manager that is excited for it, that wants people there. I mean, you talk to many race directors, and I've had the opportunity to work alongside land managers and different government entities, and it runs the gamut, right? There are some government entities, some land managers that can't do enough for any member of the outdoor community, adventure racers, bikepacking, whatever it may be, orienteering, whatever it is, they can't do enough. And they begin with an attitude of, well, let's make this happen. Let's figure it out. And on the other end, there are people who, as if they just pulled the gates down around the land and they don't want to work alongside race directors. Have you found that experience in your own planning over the years?
Yeah. And it's, it's like personalities. It's all on who you get on the other side of the phone or the email that interacts with you. And yeah, we've had our hurdles with, obstructionists that they just don't want to deal with it. From permitting from the Forest Service to that type of thing. But then you have people like Austin from Breaks that, it just changes your perspective. It only takes, one or two positive interactions, to kind of make you forget about all the negative ones of, getting permits or jumping through, hoops and all the rigmarole that a lot of racers, they just, they're not aware of what all it takes to get things like this permitted. So, we'll have people come up to us and they'll be like, oh, you guys should put on a race here, or, you should do this and this. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great, but that's probably not going to work from a permitting standpoint. So
yeah, it's been shared before on the podcast with other race directors on board. They talk a lot about it's essential to build those relationships early before you have to ask for things. Right, to talk to a land manager and say, listen, we're considering putting a race on here. Here's our general thoughts. What do you think? And having them work alongside you. As with any human nature, they would respond poorly to being told, we have a plan and it's written in stone and you can't make us change it, right? So it's that negotiation along the way, which is not unlike in an adventure race itself. When your team is lost and upside down and the maps don't make sense and you're cold and you're tired and you're hungry. What about your own adventure racing experience? What have you had the chance to do? Where have you raced?
Yeah, so I've probably raced, and I always say my years are plus or minus 3 to 5 because my memory is so terrible. I would say I've probably raced, 10 to 15 years. Started out with smaller races. Actually, first one was a 12-hour race at East Fork in Kentucky, put on by Topo Adventure Sports, and fell in love with it from there. I want to say maybe 2 years later, I did my first expedition race in Untamed.
It was Untamed New England. Do you remember the year?
I want to say 07.
07. Okay, so Untamed, and it was a multi-day expedition race.
Yeah, I think it was 4 days. And actually, the guy that put on the Eastport Challenge, the very first adventure race that I did, he asked if I wanted to do Untamed. I was like, well, I think it's too big for me. What do you think? He was like, no, you're good. I was like, okay, sounds good. Let's do it. And
I love how he commits 96 hours of your life to being paddling and running and trekking and navigating. He's like, you're fine. You're fine. You're good. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. It still remains the hardest thing I've ever done. And I say that from not because I haven't done harder adventures or harder races, but it was hard for me because I was so new to the sport and just didn't have the mental game to just deal with what all was going on. So like right off the bat, we had chosen to get cheaper pack rafts instead of, alpacas or whatever. So right in the first hour, we had shredded 2 of our boats. So we were on a 4-person team. So 2 boats had no bottom whatsoever. And it was just complete carnage on the river. Of course, some of the smarter teams or teams that had lesser pack rafts, there was the option to trek along the river. But like, I don't even think that was on our radar, Brian. Like we were just like, well, we have these pack rafts. Like
we're going to get in the water. We're going to go.
Right. Yeah. Like what else would we do? So anyway, we had shredded our rafts in like the first hour. And I mean, there's just so many stories from that. But like a few of the highlights I remember where we were only down to 2 rafts. And, for our new racers and aren't familiar with pack rafts, they're intentionally made for one person, right? And they barely fit one person. But it was me and Paula Pearson in one pack raft. We were all T-Rex down trying to like paddle across this lake because there was no other option to, get across the lake. So super inefficient, piled on each other. We dumped our packs all in one raft. It was just a scene. We were obviously like the newer, or the less experienced team. Search for a checkpoint with maybe 4 or 5 other teams for, oh my gosh, I want to say like 9-10 hours. Grid search the whole hillside, like no team could find it. So ended up getting short coursed on that one. But the takeaway is, man, we still had a blast. Like we still had an absolute blast, even when we got short coursed and, we're biking around back to the finish. It's like, hey, you want to stop for ice cream? Like we're not really on the clock anymore. It's like, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's get 2 scoops and a waffle cone and, let's finish this thing out right. So, I'm glad I did it because it opened up the door to me knowing that there's a lot bigger adventures out there, and that if I can handle that as, with my experience, that I can probably tackle the bigger stuff.
When someone jumps into an event like an expedition race, and it's worth pointing out for the listeners out there that that challenge is relative, right? So one person's 4-day expedition race challenge may be equivalent to somebody's 24-hour challenge, 30-hour challenge, things like that. And it sounds like you follow that regular pattern of you didn't realize you could do those things until you actually tried to go and do those things. And you didn't wait around until you were ready until you got into the race. Did you feel you were ready for that race, or could you have ever been ready for that race without doing it?
Yeah, I don't think, no. I never felt like I was ready just because I knew it was going to be a show. But, I had this is back when I was doing triathlons as well. So the year previous I'd done an Ironman. So I was like, well, maybe physically, maybe I'm kind of ready for it. Sleep deprivation was unknown to me. So it was like all of these unknowns, but, I had 3 other teammates backing me up. So I was like, well, whatever happens, whatever goes south, at least I have a team and, we'll be fine. In which that was the case. I remember one late night trek leg, like we were on 2 hours of sleep on late in day 2 or 3. And my feet had just completely fallen apart, blisters everywhere. And for those that have never recreated in Maine during that time of year, just mosquitoes and black flies absolutely everywhere.
Those are actually the 2 state birds of Maine, by the way.
I would believe it. So as soon as you would stop for anything to eat or to lube or whatever, the swarms would just come in on you. Yeah, and it was terrible. So, but my feet were falling apart, and I couldn't mentally function anymore. So I was like, listen, guys, I'm going to have to take care of this. So we stop on the hillside, I pull off my shoes and I take my feet pretty heavily. And like, that's preventative, but it actually didn't work very well. So I'm pulling off this tape and like layers of skin are coming off with this tape. And I'm like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Black flies are like eating me. And I'm like, why am I here? Like, what circumstances have led me to be on this hillside, pulling skin off my feet, getting swarmed by these, critters? And I was just like,
what decisions have I made in my life that brings me here right now?
Right. And I don't know. It's hard to know where to put it when you've never been in that situation before, but you kind of fix yourself up and keep on going. And then, if you need to, fall back 20 meters off the tail end and have yourself a little pity party cry. And then I guess just keep going. I don't know what other option there is. So that's where I was at with it.
We were day 3 in Scotland and we were just tired and beat up and it was a long, long trek. And I'd fallen off the back a little bit and I couldn't not fall down. I just kept falling down on this trail and I just kept falling. It was the weirdest thing. And I let my 3 teammates get ahead of me a little bit. And I gave myself a bit of a pep talk. Like, you're here voluntarily. You chose to be here. You trained for this. You don't get to complain about, like, kind of like knuckle up a little bit and let's go. And how that little self-talk really kind of helped a little bit. But that was dark. Like, that was a really hard place to be. And as always, too, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of caffeine always helps also. But like, holy cow. And so that was 2 years into your racing experience that you took a shot at Untamed New England. Was that your only expedition race or did you do others?
That was my first expedition race. So since then, I've probably done a half dozen. Did Cowboy Tough a few years, Untamed again. Just did Expedition Oregon last year. So yeah, I have a few expedition races under my belt and then some other kind of bigger side adventures that are outside of the AR world.
So let's talk for a second about the other expedition races, then let's go into your bigger adventures, right? Because it sounds like adventure racing has checked off a huge box for you, but you didn't stop just there, which is not uncommon. So the Cowboy Tough and Expedition Oregon, how did you find those experiences? Did you find the expedition level races to still be as challenging? Do you build a muscle in yourself? Like, how do you go into an expedition race now? What's your attitude like? What's your physicality like?
Yeah, much better than expedition race number one. And I think some of it is just the physical preparation, knowing how to train and just be prepared. But then a lot of it too is like we were talking about, just the mental aspect of it, to where you've been there. Like, there's hard times. You've probably had harder. So it's just like, okay, I can turn the key off for X number of hours and just do this. So yeah, it does get, like you said, dark and hard and all that stuff. But I think once you've done it and you've come out the other side, then you have the oomph to know it'll get better. Like,
every experience you do compounds your ability to do the next experience with even more of a challenge. I also find too that in those races, what I've experienced and what I've seen and I've learned is that when you start coming apart at the seams a little bit, turn to your stomach first. Like, try to get some food in you, some nutrition in you. That helps your attitude. I always like to say that your stomach betrays you first, then your brain betrays you, and then your body betrays you. And if you take care of those things in reverse order, you're going to be okay. I see that very often. It sounds like from Maine, Cowboy Tough, Oregon, you've done other Untamed New Englands in there, but you mentioned how you went from that into bigger adventures, that you stepped outside the adventure racing world. What else have you done that's big and fun and mean and nasty and challenging?
Yeah, so bikepacking, like we already mentioned. I won't say that I retired from adventure racing, like we were always putting on races, but maybe 4 years ago, I was kind of moving away from structured ARs and expedition races and wanting to kind of create my own adventures, kind of do things freestyle. So that's when me and a couple buddies landed on bikepacking, and like, to me, that fulfilled I don't know, it was something that wasn't as prescribed suffering. Like, I could choose my own level of hurt and distance and all of that. It wasn't this rush of being on the clock or I have to do this now. It's like, well, there's this route. I know what it entails. I know it's going to be hard, but I can do it on my own terms. So that's how I landed on bikepacking. And I say that I softly retired from adventure racing, but I just did Expedition Oregon last year because Doug Ritzer kind of brought me out of retirement. He was like, I've been wanting to do this for a long time. Let's race this together. So I was like, well, Ben Racing's known for some like legit pack rafting, which is not my oddly enough, I have a fear of dying. So it's like, well, I can walk a mountain bike, right? If something's too sketchy or whatever, like no shame in walking my bike around. It's like when you're in a pack raft or if you're rafting and you don't have the skills to do it, it's easy to say, well, I'm going to get out and scout this drop or rapid or whatever. But you know how that goes. Like,
yeah. It gets high consequence very quickly. You're in a race, so your judgment is impaired because you're looking to go faster. Like there's a whole other factor to come together. And for the listeners out there, Expedition Oregon, which is an amazing race, and Jason and Chelsea and everyone in Bend does a great job with that. They build themselves, rightfully so, I believe, as America's toughest race. And you're probably alluding to this year's edition, which started with the how many mile pack raft to start?
It was a 62 mile pack raft, I think it was.
Gotcha. So this is a 4-day race, 5 day. I think it was 4-day race. And next thing you know, welcome aboard. By the way, you're getting in your pack raft and you're going to be on this river for 60 miles in a pack raft at the start of this race. Yeah.
I mean, that's like, again, it's like no regrets. I'm super stoked I did it. And actually to prepare for it. So, I came in with when I signed up to the race, I came in with a great fear of paddling. And paddling rapids, right? I've had a few incidences on like guided raft trips where either I or my party members have come out of the boats and it's just been like, wow, that was close. So I came in to the registration of I'm physically dreading pack rafting, which is not a good feeling to have. Like you said, you're doing this voluntarily. Like you're paying money, investing time, training, all of this to do an adventure. But I had this dread of like the pack raft legs, and I was like, well, I'll just get through those so I can, play around on my bike and hike around in Oregon, which is one of my favorite states. So I was like, well, whatever. And then I was like, no, like this isn't jiving. This doesn't make sense. So ended up just kind of throwing myself into it to learn the skill better, at least to the level to where I wasn't going into it with like a complete gut dread. Like, yeah, I'm not the best paddler now, but at least I can go into it with confidence that, I'm not getting myself foolishly into something that's over my head. So, I did a swiftwater rescue course and hooked up with an experienced paddler to actually run, 2 and 3 rapids in the pack raft that I use. So that was the biggest change for me last year, was having that fear and coming up with a game plan. Because, directing races, that's like part of it. It's logistics. And how do we reduce the failure points in this race to where it's going to go off smoothly? So I looked at it like that and I was like, well, I signed up for this. I shouldn't be dreading any leg of it before I'm even in it. So that's just kind of one, I don't know if it's advice or just something I'm proud of. It's like, it was a fear. I tackled it, overcame it. And then I enjoyed the pack raft, even though it was that first leg was way too long and our shoulders were numb. I think it took us like 12, 14 hours to get to the TA after that. It was fine. Like didn't come out of the boat. Like it was all good. Actually, like zero stress.
After all that worrying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Much like pack rafting is to you, I'm not a big fan of going into the ground. Right. And so my big concern is going into a race is it going to be a caving section? And I can do heights well. I do speed okay. I'm okay with water. But before I went off to Scotland, I remember obsessing about there being a caving section, because there was a caving section in the previous iterations for Iterra in both Ireland as well as in Wales. And I was I went to bed every night for like 6 months thinking about this caving section. And then we get to Scotland and they unveil the race map. They drop the race map and there's not a single cave on there. And I couldn't believe it. I'd worried about it for months. And it's interesting that you talk about the idea, and this is a really good thing to zero in on. And I'm glad that you mentioned it, because because as adventure racers, people who see us from the outside in think that we're fearless, and they think that we do these things that are intense and scary, and that we dive into it with this sort of laissez-faire attitude of devil may care and off we go. When in reality, you talk about your concern about being caught in bad water, right? Which gets high consequence really quickly. My concern about going into the ground, which I'm working on by going to my friend's place down in Virginia and actually going into the caves down there to work on that. It's acknowledging the fear that we have and then getting a plan together to address that fear. And then when the race comes, it is what it is.
Yeah, and that's super, super valid. Like me personally, I am very averse to injury. And like my game plan, like I am not fearless in the least, like opposite of. So, I try to match my skill set to what I'm doing. So yeah, I mean, I ride some what in my mind is sketchy stuff or paddle stuff that's right on the edge of my skill set. But oh gosh, now like if fearless is not at all a word that I would use to describe myself. Analytical, yeah. Like
yeah, right.
Self-preservation, absolutely. Fearless,
right.
no.
And I have to tell you, if I jumped into a race and if I was randomly paired with a teammate, and if he or she told me that they had no fear and they were fearless, I'd be scared to race with that person.
Yeah, rightly so.
Yeah, right. Because they're going to take us in a direction that we're gonna be upside down pretty quickly, pretty soon. So I appreciate you talking about your challenges at Expedition Oregon, which by the way was a crusher of a race from what I understand. That was a hard race this year.
Yeah, it was, designed to live up to the name, hardest race. And it did. I mean, I can't imagine me doing that race as my first expedition race like I did Untamed. Like, I just don't even know where you would put any of that. And actually the scariest moment I've ever had in an adventure race was rappelling off of the cliff there that they had with our bikes on our back. It was just, it was just didn't work out for me very well. So definitely a scary moment, like bike on your back, trying to rappel off of this cliff on like day 4 with, 5 hours of sleep, just completely had. And it's like, well, what's going to happen here? Am I going to black out and just dangle here? I don't know. I'm not sure what to do about this.
Yeah. You end up waking up in the ambulance, right? One of those things, right? But you made it through that. So you mentioned you've done some pretty big bikepacking trips. A lot of our listeners, well, I think it's good to point out, and many adventure racers, people come into the sport through endurance sports, triathlon, they come in through marathoning, they dip their toe in the adventure racing water and they love it. And they find that 2 things happen. One, adventure racing ruins them for other races because the other races tell you what direction to go. And the lack of navigation throws them off. The other thing is that they graduate from adventure racing, they say to themselves, I have a lot of capacity, I have a lot of skill now, and I want to go do my own adventures, make up my own thing. And that's a very common trend that we see in adventure racing. People continue adventure racing. They'll go to Expedition Oregon. They'll do 1 or 2 big races a year. But those free weekends, they're in the Adirondacks and they're doing figure 8 loops, or they're going on bikepacking trips. We have a friend going to Rainier this year. We have another friend who's doing some major backcountry skiing. You branched into the bikepacking. What routes have you done with the bikepacking?
Yeah, and I think what you said is definitely true. Trajectory of a lot of racers we talk to, and myself as well. I'm good to do 1 expedition race a year, but most of my other time is spent doing my own adventures and own things. So next year on the calendar, my 1 expedition race for the year will be Rootstock's race in Pennsylvania.
So
that'll be my 1 expedition. Yep, Endless Mountains. They're already registered for that one. But then the bikepacking scene. So I've done a lot. If anybody is new to it, bikepacking.com is where you want to be. Dozens and dozens of routes are listed, along with a lot of instruction on how to get started and all that good stuff. But started picking routes off of bikepacking.com. And actually the very first route that we did, I think it was called the Gila River Ramble in Arizona. And coming from the adventure racing world, I don't know if I wouldn't call it cockiness, but just like, I got this, like this won't be a thing because we're adventure racers. Like, is it really going to be harder than adventure racing? And it was definitely an eye opener. Bikepackers are some really hard people, and they're creating hard routes that will really put you to the test if you're trying to do it kind kind of in their suggested time. So it was like, wow, who knew that bike packers were, as hard as adventure racers? Like I certainly didn't know that. So that was another appeal to it of, wow, this is a thing. This is a legit, like, let's see what we can do here. So started picking off a bunch of routes on there, like the Stagecoach 400 and some of the higher profile ones. A few years ago, me and Doug, we did the Colorado Trail together, which is like one of the quintessential bikepacking routes that you got to do if you're really into it, which we were. Eyeing the Tour Divide this year if things work out as it should. And yeah,
the Tour Divide is from, if Canada opens up, that's Banff all the way down to southern Arizona, correct? It's like 3,500 miles.
Yeah, all the way across the U.S. north to south. So that's another one of those routes that if you're a bike packer and you can make it happen, you pretty much got to make it happen because it's incredible. So I have a few friends that have done it as well. So yeah, hopefully that'll happen this year. But it's kind of that movement away from organized, structured, time constraint events, and more so, let's see what we can do on our own.
It is pretty cool too with the capacity and the skill you build over adventure racing, the mental capacity of being able to put up with endurance events and feeling strong there, knowing how to manage yourself, your sleep, your food, your survival. It gives you a skill set that you've honed over time that you could roll out your driveway with your bike packed with gear, and you could pedal wherever you want for as long as you want and come back whenever you want. And that's a pretty nice feeling to have personally.
Yeah, it really is. Like, yeah. And that would never have come to fruition without adventure racing. Like, you just can't. You can try to train for it, but I don't. Like, I haven't found training that I'm willing to push myself hard enough to do outside of adventure racing or these, bikepacking races, to where you're ever going to train yourself just to get in it deep and then come out the other side with it. So October, not on a whim, we kind of like talked about it back and forth. We're like, just kind of like 2 weekends before, we're like, hey, you want to do the TNGA route, which is a really popular in Trans-North Georgia.
Trans-North Georgia. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're like, well, yeah, let's try that. And then we had I call it couch confidence. We were like, well, it's like, well, if we're going to do the TNGA, maybe we should yoga it, which is, you do it one way, flip around, do it the other way. And again, I keep on mentioning Doug Ritzert. He's kind of my partner in crime of doing, big things together. He's the one I did expedition with, Oregon with, Colorado Trail, etc. So we were like, well, yeah, let's give it a try. So we were actually pretty on track to do it. We started at kind of central Mulberry Gap, made it to the start, back through Mulberry Gap, made it to the finish. But there's this, for anybody that's ridden the TMGA or hasn't, there's a section of highway outside of Dalton it was too sketchy for us, just kind of 3-lane highway, no shoulder. We hit it at the wrong time, kind of right at dark, right at rush hour. And so we were like,
that's the worst.
Yeah. It's like, let's not ride, let's not ever ride back on this road again. So we ended up, I don't know, we did maybe 80% of the yoga of the TMGA, which is good. I think we had it in us as far as time and physical. But yeah, we just didn't, much like running the class 4 and your pack wrapped. If you're not cool with it, then
we had that experience we were in Newfoundland, myself and 4 friends. We did the 9-day 600-mile trailway across Newfoundland. Is an abandoned railway system. And for a chunk of it, you have to get on the highway. You have no choice but to ride on it. And it was fine because the shoulder was 6 foot wide, except when we had to go over water. And it was non-existent. So whenever you cross the stream, you had to look over your shoulder and hope like the next 40 feet, no one was going to come roaring down the highway behind you. And we were like, we couldn't get off that road fast enough.
Yeah, I hate those situations. And, my buddy Doug was actually like, call it stress whistling. Like, dude never whistles. He was just like, stress whistling.
It was either stress whistle or scream. It was one or the other was going to come out of him.
Yeah. So that is what it is. I mean, I hate riding roads and I hate putting racers on roads. I know sometimes it's inevitable. And a lot of people do that route and no one had mentioned it before. So maybe we're just, I don't want to say it's soft, but again, not fearless in the least. So maybe I'm just more averse to, planning on bigger adventures on bigger days and I don't know. I guess
So you've checked off a lot of the big. So welcome to the Dark Zone, a bikepacking podcast. So you've checked off a lot of the bigger. Have you done like the Western Wildlands route is very popular. There's the Arkansas High Country route that's popular now. Have you considered going out to the other big high name bikepacking routes?
Yeah, those are all on our radar. It's just like which ones do we want to do first? So yeah, those are definitely on our list of things to do. The Oregon Timber Trail is a cool one that I definitely want to play on. Yeah, just some big ones. We actually want to do the Baja Divide. That one's on our list, but it's, you're talking like these big routes that, for us riding it the way that we want to ride it, you're talking, 3-4 week investments. So
yeah, it's one of these things where, it's interesting because I was reading through the notes on the breakdown bikepacking route. And first of all, I had a laugh. You link to another site that talked about the way that you're supposed to do self-supported bikepacking. And I got a kick out of the one line that there are no entry fees, prizes, or support. Like they made it very clear. So why do you think people such as yourself and people such as me and adventure racers who go into bikepacking and adventure racers who end up getting into skimo and they get into long distance pack rafting trips, right? Why do you think, what is it about these people, you and I included, that we do these things?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I'll paraphrase a conversation that I had with my buddy, riding the TNGA. And, it was pretty. It was definitely pretty, but it was the same pretty over and over. So we had seen like the high ridge lines, fall colors. So we had kind of become numb to the prettiness of it. So then it just became an exercise of, okay, we need to ride 70 plus miles a day, 10,000 feet a day. To be able to do this. So then it became a numbers game, pushing the bike game, more so let's grind this out. And then, we were pushing our bikes up the hill. And I think both of us just had that realization of why are we doing this on a recreational capacity? And should we be more so looking at doing these things to actually have fun and recreate? And, we haven't done as many big things as other racers, and that's cool. Like you said, everybody's sense of accomplishment is different. So we'll have racers that show up for the FIG that finish a 12-hour race, and they're more excited than me finishing a 4-day race, and that's cool. Like that's how that works. So I think it comes down to, and here's where I landed on it. I think moving on in the future, I'll have a pocket of adventures that are like, I love getting through things. I love the accomplishment of being in way over my head and seeing what happens and then coming out the other side of it. Like I love that aspect of adventure racing, expeditions, and these, big bikepacking journeys. And so that's one side of it. And I think that the expedition race next year, Endless Mountains, I think that will be one of those. Sure, there'll be, fun times, and I have, 3 teammates to have experiences with, but I mean, it's hard. It's just straight up hard, and we know it's hard. So I think that's one side of it, but I'm going to start exploring having fun. Like, I know it's a novel idea, but why in the past I've structured these adventures to where every adventure I would take is just a test of my mettle. Like everyone was designed to, is this going to break me? And if it's not going to break me, can I do it twice? Or, can I do it quicker? And like, I'm over that. I'm old enough now to where if I need to test myself, I can, but I also need to sprinkle in a lot more just fun things, stopping along the way, talking to people, having those ice cream cones and being okay with it.
Yeah, you do pass a point. I think everyone has a point in their life where they pass a certain age where you run out of the need to prove yourself to anybody. And therefore, it's you just doing your own thing and enjoying yourself. And you no longer need to check off a box to show the world that you could do those things, which also only comes by having made it to a certain age. You survived some pretty challenging things in your life. And then we voluntarily done some really challenging things. And being on the other side of all of that gives you a sense of self-esteem and confidence, not cockiness, but confidence that lets you kind of travel your life in a certain way.
Yeah, that's very refreshing to hear you put it that way. Like I would hate to, not hate, but I would like to think that I'm mature enough and old enough and confident enough to not have to rely on my peers to build me up or give me validation in what I'm doing. But if I'm only doing things to see if I can do them, to see if it breaks me, then I think there is a certain sense of that to where, yeah, I don't think I need that anymore. Like I've proved to myself that I can stick through it. I can handle it. Sure, I can take on adventures that are designed specifically to break me. But what's the point? Let's have a little more fun in life and not have to prove myself over and over that I can.
Yeah, you no longer have to clobber yourself into pieces to prove anything to anybody. Yeah. How do you deal with the post-adventure race blues when you get home and it's 3 days later and you're like, wow, that's behind me and the next thing is far away?
Yeah, I do a lot better with it than a lot of racers I've heard. Some of it really really gets in their head and they're bummed out for quite a while. But I use like the same mentality of, they say you're supposed to plan your next vacation while you're on vacation. So especially like we talked about, you named off 3 or 4 bikepacking routes, popular ones that I haven't done. And it's like, I know I have this like list of 50 things that I want to do. And, probably a list of a half a dozen that are actually attainable and reachable in the next 2 years. So even though I may finish a big adventure and then, eat for the next 5 days and kind of miss the just being out in the woods and, the extreme silence of it all, at the same time, it's like, well, that's okay. I know something else is coming up that's just as big and just as major.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a peak, right? You're in a big race, you're having a great time, enjoying yourself, you and your teammates, and you're that great challenge, and then that's a peak, and there's a bit of a valley when it's over, and you're kind of home, and you're figuring things out, and you're sitting at a desk again, and you're doing your gig, and then that kind of is straight for a while, and then it kind of goes back up when you get ready for a next adventure. I think that's interesting to I think we're a lot of doctoral studies waiting to be written, the attitude and the way that we approach life and the way that we see these things, because this is a common pattern among adventure racers. I've talked to enough of them through the podcast and I've heard enough stories that's not an uncommon thing, that there's something built in the DNA of certain people that they enjoy consistent challenge over time. And they like to live their life in many ways from challenge to challenge to challenge, and in between having a great life experience. It's not like it's all black or white, right? It's terrible and it's great. But I think that's definitely part of our personality that we see. And there are people's personalities too, where like they think we're absolutely out of our minds for doing this. Like they have no clue why we would voluntarily throw ourselves into these things. But I don't know why people choose to crochet, right? It's one of these things. We just don't get it.
Yeah, we've seen that too with our racers. Like we'll see the same faces over and over. They'll have good races, bad races. Some of them will, nearly break them, but I don't know. Yeah, I agree. Something in the DNA that it's like you almost need it as part of your not boring life, but it's definitely a rush to get out and do big things, to test yourself, to see big things, to just get outside. It's an important aspect of, who we are and who we have been for the last, 200,000 years.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And there's always a point in the race too, where it arrives at some point where it's just you and the maps and your teammates, and you're out there by yourself and just got to figure, usually when something goes bad, right? Your pack raft falls apart, you're stuck high up on a mountain, whatever it might be. That's when the race really comes alive for a lot of people. So great stuff. Great stuff, Shawn. So you have well over a decade involved in adventure racing. You've done big races. You've done expedition level races. You've done the FIG. You run the FIG. You've done the breakdown, a race that I just loved. What does your gut tell you about the trends in adventure racing? As you kind of look at the way the sport is going, and you're an interesting person to have a conversation, because not that you're retired from adventure racing by any means, but you seem to have gotten your fill of doing the smaller races. You like to swing at the big pitches, which is where you are right now in your life, right? You like the big expedition races. What trends are you seeing in adventure racing that you think are worth for our listeners to think about, other race directors to hear about?
Yeah, that's a great question. We thought, and I'm not removed from the hum of adventure racing, but I know there was this big bump of, or what we thought was going to be this huge bump of Eco Challenge and, riding that wave into, cash dollars and bigger races and hundreds of people showing up for these events. And so when we were kind of having the discussion with, people in the know and people that were guiding the sport, it was always this, well, what is adventure racing going to turn into if we end up with 300 people showing up to a race and, 40% of them are completely new racers and, trail runners not really sure what adventure racing is, but it's been on Amazon Prime, so it has to be freaking cool. So that was this kind of big fear that I had with this year's race, like, well, who's going to show up and what's it going to turn into? But I think by and large, from what I can tell, the sport has still remained super, niche, and like a lot of people still have no idea what adventure racing is or why anyone would ever want to adventure race. And that's like probably not the best business owner, but that's a good thing for me. Like, I don't want adventure racing to turn into this, mass market sport that's just, dumbed down, what I would call it, to make it mass appeal. Like, I truly believe in my heart of hearts that adventure racing should be inherently hard. Like, maybe that doesn't jive with a lot of people in newer races, but if it weren't hard, if it weren't, map and compass or, all of these different disciplines and the longer distances, then I don't know what we would call it, but to me, that's not adventure racing. So I'm refreshed to see that at least in our neck of the woods, it hasn't been dumbed down, that there's still a lot of hard races, and that the race directors have, held their guns on not making it, what we would call easy. So yeah, that's kind of what I've seen. Not that huge blow up, like, where is our sport headed?
That's Grant Killian, when he did the Untamed New England back in 2018, he talked about that at the beginning of the race, how there's only so much capacity on race courses for people to get out there and to be involved, because you only drop so many racers on the course at any one given time, right? And you run the risk of watering down the event to the point where it's something other than adventure racing. Call it what you want, but it's a term that goes on there. And I think it's tough to scale to. I think you're spot on with that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a good point. And I think it's nice that you recognize the fact that collectively that's not really happening, right? There's no Walmart of adventure racing race directors showing up and calling it an adventure race, and where it's everything but an adventure race, and that there's a certain soul, a certain ethic that goes with that. But that's going to be a constant tension in our sport, right? The idea of, you want to keep adventure racing. You also want to make it appealing to people who want to come on board, recognizing that there are some people that the way that adventure racing is viewed as being, it will never appeal to them, that they're not comfortable racing that way and going through that suffering and that challenge. And that's the balancing act, I guess, that we're all looking for as race directors and racers and people who are involved in the sport.
Yeah. And I think that is, I know there's a few full-time race directors out there, and I know it's important, again, probably not the best business owner mentality. It's important to make money and, keep the sport alive. But at the same time, I don't think that we as race directors need to water it down to make that happen. And I think, at least the race directors that I know and respect, they certainly have not done that. I know initially our turnaround of first-time racers, absolutely terrible. And it was like, well, what can we do to make sure that our first-time racers have a good experience and that they come back? And I mean, we tried really hard. We tried like shorter races, like 6-hour races, still being respectful to what adventure racing truly is. And we just landed on the fact that this is not for everyone. It's simply not for everyone. And it's okay if you race it and you don't like it, cool. Good for you for giving it a try. But we eventually ended up being like, we cannot keep spinning our wheels, trying to get all of our first-time racers to come back for their second race, because in doing so, there has to be a give and take. And we did not want to take away from, our big courses, our hard courses that really challenge, the elite racers that show up. So, yeah, we implemented a few things to help them come back. But again, it's not for everyone. And I think that's the appeal by and large to people that do adventure racing, is they know it's not for everybody.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. As promised, Shawn was a thoughtful, experienced, and insightful guest. We're grateful for his time. Listeners are encouraged to visit www.361adventures.com to learn more about their excellent race organization. That's the numbers 361adventures.com. I have the breakdown bikepacking route on my to-do list for the upcoming season. It's not to be missed, and I can't wait to give it a try. If you have enjoyed this episode, please pay a visit to your podcast streaming platform of choice and leave us a review. That is the best way to spread the word. Also, always feel free to reach out to me at brian@ardarkzone.com. Your feedback and guest suggestions are always welcome. Again, thank you to our sponsors at tansinavigation.org for their support, and thank you listeners for joining us in the Dark Zone. Have fun out there and be safe.